Hello again and welcome to another Bible study in the life of David. Today we're in 2 Samuel chapter 9 and 10. You've come across David as a shepherd, as a musician, as a national hero, as an army commander, as a fugitive, as a king anointed 3 times, to him capturing Jerusalem and bringing the ark into it. Things are going to get better and better for David during chapters 9 and 10. We're going to see David at his best, David at the top of his game. For chapter 9, I'm going to pretend to be the person at the centre of the story, Mephibosheth. And I'm going to tell the story of chapter 9 as if I were Mephibosheth. So I'm changing hat now and I'm becoming Mephibosheth. My name is Mephibosheth. Jonathan was my father, Saul my grandpa. King David's reign is going really well. Largely, he has defeated the Philistines. He has made Jerusalem his capital, and the Ark of the Covenant has been brought into the city so that the worship of the Lord can be centralized there. Moreover, God has promised that David's son will build a temple for God, and God will build a house for David, a dynasty that will never die out. King David then asked around whether anyone had survived from the house of King Saul. They found a man called Ziba, who had been Saul's steward. Ziba was brought to the king. David asked Ziba if anyone of Saul's family was still alive to whom David could show the kindness of God. Ziba thought of me, Mephibosheth. You may remember me from chapter 4, verse 4. After the battle on Mount Gilboa, when King Saul and Prince Jonathan were both killed, my nurse picked me up. Now, this was well over a decade ago. I was only 5 then. She picked me up to take me to a place of safety, but she dropped me. And I've been lame, disabled in my feet ever since. I was brought up by an unknown man, Machir, in a little-known village called Lo-debar. I was a nobody from nowhere, although by now I have married and I have a son. One day in Lo-debar, there was a knock at the door. Messengers from Ziba, Saul's former steward, told me that I had to go to Jerusalem to see the king. I was terrified that David would see me as a grandson of Saul and therefore as a rival to his throne. And we all know what happened to General Abner. I was so scared. I bowed down to the king and paid him honor. But David spoke to me by name. I said, "I'm at your service." And I meant it. Much later, at dinner one day, the king told me that he had made a promise to my grandfather, King Saul. David had made an oath to Saul not to kill off his family members. That is why he didn't kill me. But also David had made a promise to my father, Jonathan, never to cut off his family either. But it was much later that I was told about these promises and understood them. To my amazement, David said, "Don't be afraid. I will show you kindness. I will give you what remains of Saul's land," which actually was David's land because he was king. He also said I could eat at the king's table. I had a pension for life. Overnight, I had become a wealthy man. All of a sudden, my fear of the king had been removed. Instantly, I had no anxieties about my future well-being. I bowed down. I said, "Why would you notice a dead dog like me?" I found out later that Goliath had taunted David. "Am I a dog that you came at me with sticks?" And when David had spared Saul in the cave, he had shouted at Saul, "Who are you pursuing? A dead dog? A flea?" I felt like that. A dead dog? A flea? I was a nobody, brought up by a nobody from a nowhere village. I was no one. I had nothing to offer. I had no money. I couldn't fight in the army. I couldn't farm a field because of my feet. Why had David done this? In part, to fulfill his promise to Jonathan, and in part, as it says in verse 3, he wanted to show God's kindness. So I was raised to being treated as one of the king's sons. The king then instructed Ziba, Saul's erstwhile servant, to farm the land that now belonged to me and to bring me the crops. There was enough land to provide work for Ziba and his 15 sons and 20 servants. That's a huge farm. Ziba agreed to help to keep the king's commands so that I could live like a prince. Ziba and his 35 men became servants to me and my son. I ate at the king's table, but in spite of everything, I was still lame. I do hope you'll read that chapter for yourselves. I hope I brought out the spirit of that chapter. Let's just ponder on it a moment. Here we have a man who deserved nothing, who was given everything. A man who was a potential rival to David was trusted and given a place at the king's table. A man who had no claim on the king was raised up to sit with the king's children. The word that is used in this chapter is the word kindness, God's kindness. If the New Testament had been writing this story, I think it would have used the word grace. Grace isn't much of a 21st century word, is it? Today, we think you get what you deserve. Don't expect favours. You earn your own passage. You get rewarded for effort. Earn acceptance. Pull yourself up by your own bootlaces. Nobody owes you a living. Grace is the opposite of that. Grace is giving much to somebody who deserves nothing. Justice is getting what you rightly deserve. Mephibosheth did not deserve what he got. Grace is getting what you do not deserve. That's what Mephibosheth experienced. David Pawson tells us that grace means that bad works are no hindrance and good works are no help. David chose to show God's kindness, and God chooses to show God's own kindness to those who believe in his Son. God is kind, and he calls on us to be kind. He is gracious, and he calls on us to be gracious. Let me read to you from the book of Titus. For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Saviour, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. You see, we who have received grace should be gracious people. We, to whom God has been exceptionally kind, should be exceptionally kind to others. Now, let's move into chapter 10 now. Verses 1 to 6. In the course of time, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded him as king. David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent a delegation to express his sympathy to Hanun concerning his father. When David's men came to the land of the Ammonite commanders said to Hanun their lord, Do you think David is honouring your father by sending envoys to you to express sympathy? Hasn't David sent them to you only to explore the city and spy it out and overthrow it? So Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved off half of each man's beard, cut off their garments at the buttocks, and sent them away. When David was told about this, he sent messengers to meet the men, for they were greatly humiliated. The king said, Stay at Jericho till your beards have grown back, and then come back. When the Ammonites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, they hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rehob and Zobar, as well as the king Maacah, with 1,000 men, and also 12,000 men from Tob. You may remember Nahash. He was the man, the commander, who used to gouge out the right eyes of every soldier that he captured. Since then, Nahash had died. But his son was now king, and David wanted to make friends with him because apparently, we're not told when or how, David and Nahash had made peace with one another. And David wanted to perpetuate that peace with his son Hanun. So he sent a diplomatic peace mission to Hanun. But Hanun's commanders smelt a rat. Actually, there was no rat. They said, espionage, spies. These men have come into your kingdom, Hanun, to spy out and to take word back to David, and he'll come back with an army and mop us up. So Hanun decided to humiliate David's men, his ambassadors, by shaving off half their beards and cutting off their clothes at buttock level. Can you imagine our foreign secretary going to Moscow to meet President Putin and then being returned to England and coming down the steps of the jet at Heathrow with no trousers because Putin had stolen his trousers? It would be a humiliation, wouldn't it? And this was designed to humiliate. It was actually not just a grave insult, it was a declaration of war. David heard about this, told them not to come back to court until their beards had regrown and they got a new pair of trousers. Meanwhile, the Ammonites prepared for war by hiring mercenaries from Syria or Aram. Depending on what translation of the Bible you're using, you may see the word Aram and Aramites or Syria and Syrians. They are the same place, just presented in different ways in different translations. The Ammonites got 33,000 mercenaries from various sources to supplement their own Ammonite army. And then in verses 7 to 14, David put Joab in charge. Remember Joab who'd murdered Abner, Joab who had masterminded the capture of Jerusalem, Joab who was the commander-in-chief. Joab faced two armies, so he split his army into two. He told Abishai, brother of Joab, Abishai, I want you to command the army which is trying to take the city of Rabbah. The Ammonites were defending Rabbah. I, Joab, I'll take the other army and we'll go out into the open country and fight the Arameans or the Syrians. If I get into trouble, you come to my help. If you get into trouble, I'll come to help you. 11 and 12. Joab said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come to you to rescue you. Be strong, and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. This is the first time that I can find that Joab has expressed any faith in God at all. Be strong, let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. The outcome of this was that both of the Israelite armies enjoyed a great victory. But the Arameans regrouped and they sent for reinforcements from beyond the river Euphrates, and they appointed a new commander-in-chief called Shobach. Let me read from verse 17. When David was told of this, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, and went to Helam. The Arameans formed their battle lines to meet David and fought against him. But they fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace with the Israelites and became subject to them. So the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. David crosses the river Jordan and he goes to this new battle site, and takes charge of his army himself. This is probably 35 miles east of Galilee. And he enjoys a comprehensive victory, defeating the Aramean cavalry and their infantry. And then there was peace in verse 19. All the kings made peace with the Israelites. So David had subdued his enemies in the east and in the north. He'd secured the trade routes from Egypt to Syria to Arabia, and he'd achieved political dominance and economic advantage. David is at the top of his game. He is at the peak of his political power. He's at the height of his economic authority, and he's also doing well in his relationship with God, and he's knowing how to show kindness. So in these 2 chapters, we've seen David keeping his promise to Jonathan by being kind to Melchizedek. He has shown unearned kindness, grace to Mephibosheth, not Melchizedek, to Mephibosheth. And we call unearned kindness grace in New Testament terms. David had tried to maintain peace with the Ammonites, but the Ammonites had insulted his envoys. And so David has gone back and he is now slaughtered, 40,000 of the enemy. He's now the most powerful king in the region, politically and economically. David is in the ascendant. He is at his best as a politician, at his best as a king, at his best as a man, at his best as a friend, at his best as a commander. What could possibly go wrong? And if you don't want to know, don't read chapter 11. What then can we learn from chapter 9 and chapter 10? Well, chapter 9, as I've already said, is a chapter about grace. It's about a chapter about kindness. It's about the undeserved favour of God. David was reaching out to bless somebody just for the sake of blessing him and to keep a promise. And God reaches out to bless us just because he loves us, and only when we trust his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And then in chapter 10, David attempted to maintain peace with the Ammonites. He said, I will show kindness to Hanun, their new king. But that gesture was thrown into the ground as trash. But he was trying to maintain peace. Didn't Paul say in Romans, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone? Didn't Jesus say to us, blessed are the peacemakers? They shall be called the children of God. David was trying to behave well. He was trying to be a peacemaker, and so should we. Again, and this is a point we've seen many times, we see a relationship between our responsibility and God's sovereignty. Verse 12 again, be strong, let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. That's Joab's prayer. Joab knew that God was going to give them the victory, but the army still had to fight. A job needed to be done. The army needed to go into battle. But the outcome had been determined by God. God was going to get his way, but when God is going to get his way, he does it through people. He does it through his servants. He does it through his church. There is God's sovereignty and authority. He knows what he's going to achieve, but he will do it on earth through his people. We must be available to do the works of God for him. But the final and the most powerful point of these 2 chapters, I've extolled David being at his best, David being at the top of his game. Things couldn't get any better for David. And when he was there at the top, he found that he was more vulnerable than ever. In 1 Corinthians 10 it says, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. That's the New International Version. I like the Authorized Version for this verse. It resonates with me. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. If only David had that verse in mind at the end of chapter 10. J.B. Phillips translates it, so let the man who feels sure of his standing today be careful that he does not fall tomorrow. And the Good News Bible says, whoever thinks he is standing firm had better be careful that he doesn't fall. That's a lesson for us, is it not? That when we're walking with God and when the Spirit is with us and we're aware of his blessings and we're having victories in the Christian life and all seems to be going well, that is at the point when we may be at our most vulnerable. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Amen.